In the unforgiving dust of the Texas frontier, justice wasn't a blindfolded lady holding scales. It was a man with a tin star and a heart as cold as a desert night. For Matilda Foster, that man was Sheriff Bartholomew Cain. He didn't just arrest her. He aimed to break her, chaining her in the public square like an animal. Her crime, a desperate act of love. Her punishment, to bake under the sun, beside a man the town called a savage, a Comanche warrior, whose silence was more terrifying than any threat. But in the West, the deadliest predators aren't always the ones in chains. This is the story of how two outcasts bound by iron discovered that the only true freedom lies in a heart brave enough to claim it. The sun over Redemption Gulch was a merciless hammer beating down on the cracked earth and bleaching the life from everything it touched. For Matilda Foster, it was a physical torment that matched the fire of shame in her belly. The iron manacle around her wrist was coarse and heavy, its chain leading to a thick iron ring bolted into a weathered post in the center of town. It was a punishment meant for horse thieves and murderers, not for a woman accused of stealing laudanum. Sheriff Bartholomew Cain watched her from the shade of his office porch, a thin smile playing on his lips. He was a tall, severe man, with a jaw that seemed carved from granite, and eyes the color of a washed-out sky. He had built this town, he often reminded its citizens, on the twin pillars of law and order. But Matilda knew better. He had built it on fear. "Let this be a lesson, Miss Foster," he'd said, his voice, a low drawl that did nothing to hide its venom as he'd fastened the lock. Property is sacred in Redemption Gulch. More sacred even than a mother's comfort. Her mother. The thought brought a fresh wave of despair. Martha Foster was wasting away, her body consumed by a lung fever that left her gasping for every breath. The town doctor, a nervous man named Finch, who was deep in Cain's pocket, had demanded a price for the medicine that was 10 times its worth. A price Matilda, who earned pennies doing laundry and mending, could never hope to pay. So she had waited until the doctor was gone and slipped into his office, taking only a single small bottle. She was caught before she'd made it 10 paces down the boardwalk. Now she was a public spectacle. The townsfolk who had known her since she was a girl, the baker, the blacksmith's wife, Mr. Peterson from the general store, now averted their eyes, scurrying past, as if her shame were contagious. But she was not alone. Chained to the opposite side of the same post was him, the Comanche. He'd been there for 3 days, a silent, formidable presence. The townsfolk whispered his name was Komatse, a warrior captured after a skirmish near the Palo Duro Canyon. They called him a savage, a renegade, a killer. To Matilda he was terrifying. He was broad-shouldered, and lean, his skin the color of rich earth, etched with scars that told stories she couldn't imagine. His long black hair was unbound, and his dark eyes missed nothing. He had watched her being chained with an unnerving stillness, his expression unreadable. For hours he hadn't moved or spoken, enduring the sun's assault with a stoicism that seemed superhuman. Her throat was a desert. The water bucket left for them was empty, kicked over by a jeering drunk hours ago. Her vision began to swim the dusty street, dissolving into a wavering haze. She slumped against the post, the rough wood scraping her back. Defeat felt like a heavy cloak settling over her. As dusk began to bleed, purple and orange across the sky, Deputy Miller, a young man whose face was still soft with youth, approached hesitantly. He was a stark contrast to Cain, quiet, watchful, and burdened by a conscience. He carried a tin canteen. "Sheriff's orders," he mumbled, not meeting her eye. He unhooked the canteen and offered it to her. Matilda drank greedily the lukewarm water, the most precious thing she'd ever tasted. When she finished, she looked at the silent man beside her. His lips were cracked, and a thin sheen of sweat covered his brow, but he had made no move, no plea. "He needs water too," she rasped, her voice raw. Miller shifted nervously. "Sheriff said. He said the renegade gets nothing. Said to let the sun teach him some respect." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. This wasn't justice. It was torture. Matilda looked at the warrior. His gaze was fixed on the distant horizon, as if the town and its people were nothing more than a passing irritation. He was a man, not an animal. "Please, Deputy," she whispered, holding out the canteen. "Just a little. No one has to know." Miller's eyes darted toward the sheriff's office, where a lamp had just been lit. He chewed on his lip, his internal conflict plain on his face. Finally, with a sigh that sounded like a surrender, he took the canteen, shuffled around the post, and offered it to the Comanche. The warrior's eyes moved from the horizon to Miller's face, then to Matilda's. The look was not one of gratitude, but of cool assessment. He took the canteen, drank slowly and deliberately, then handed it back to the deputy. Before Miller could retreat, the man spoke, his voice low and surprisingly clear, with none of the guttural sounds she'd expected. "The woman showed you your honor," he said, the words precise. "You should listen to her more often." Deputy Miller flushed and hurried away without another word. A thick silence fell between them, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant saloon piano. The sun had set, and a sliver of moon hung in the inky sky. The chain felt colder now, a stark reminder of her captivity. "Thank you," Matilda said, quietly to the darkness. She wasn't sure if he heard her or if he would even care. For a long moment there was no reply. She thought he had retreated back into his wall of silence. Then his voice came again from the other side of the post, a deep resonance that seemed to vibrate through the wood. "He does not chain you to punish a thief," the warrior said. "He chains you because he wants to own what he cannot have." The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had seen the way Sheriff Cain looked at her, a possessive gleam in his eyes that had always made her skin crawl. She had dismissed it, pushed it away as fearful imagination. But hearing it spoken aloud by a stranger, a man who saw everything with such piercing clarity, made the ugly truth undeniable. This wasn't about medicine. This was about Bartholomew Cain wanting to break her spirit, to grind her down until she was nothing but a possession to be claimed. Her prison wasn't just the iron chain on her wrist, it was the entire town of Redemption Gulch, and Cain was the warden. The nights were a different kind of trial. The oppressive heat gave way to a biting chill that seeped into Matilda's bones. Sleep came only in short, fitful bursts, filled with nightmares of her mother's ragged breathing and Sheriff Cain's cold smile. Her only constant was the steady, quiet presence on the other side of the post. They began to talk, their voices, low whispers that wouldn't carry to the sheriff's office or the saloon. He told her his people called him Komatse. But he also had another name given to him years ago, at a trading post. "They find our names difficult," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A man there called me Cole. It is shorter." "Cole," Matilda repeated softly. It felt strange to attach such a simple common name to the formidable man beside her. It made him less of a fearsome legend and more of a person. "My name is Matilda. Most call me Tilly." He didn't respond to her name, but she felt his acknowledgement in the silence. He spoke in short, deliberate sentences, his English better than that of many men who had been born to it. He told her he had learned it from a trapper his family had sheltered one harsh winter. He asked her why she was chained. She told him everything about her mother's illness, Dr. Finch's greed, her own desperation. She expected judgment, or perhaps dismissal of her troubles as trivial compared to his. Instead, he listened without interruption. When she finished her voice, thick with unshed tears, he was quiet for a long time. "To fight for one's family is not a crime," he said at last. "It is the only law that matters, the man with the star. He does not understand this. He understands only cages." "He understands power," Tilly corrected bitterly, "and how to use it against those who have none." "Power that is worn on the outside like a tin star is brittle," Cole replied. "True power is carried within. It cannot be taken." His words were a strange comfort. They chipped away at the wall of fear and prejudice she had built around him. This was not the mindless savage the townspeople described. This was a man of profound thought and dignity who saw the world in a way she was only just beginning to grasp. On her third day in chains, the real torment began. Sheriff Cain emerged from his office in the mid-morning heat. He didn't approach her directly, but instead walked over to Mr. Peterson, who was sweeping the boardwalk in front of his general store. "Morning, Albert." Cain said, his voice loud enough for Tilly to hear clearly. "Heard you had a break-in a few nights back. Same night the good doctor lost his medicine. Strange coincidence, wouldn't you say?" Mr. Peterson, a portly man with a kind face that was now pale with fear, stopped sweeping. I don't know anything about that, Sheriff." "Don't you?" Cain took a step closer, looming over the smaller man. "Because I heard a rumor that someone saw our little thief, Miss Foster, slipping out your back door with a sack of flour and some salted pork. Now, you wouldn't want to be accused of withholding evidence, would you, Albert? Complicating a sheriff's investigation can have consequences." Tilly's blood ran cold. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. She had stolen nothing from Mr. Peterson. He had in fact given her goods on credit for months, knowing her situation. Cain was twisting her desperation into a narrative of common criminality, poisoning the few people who might have felt sympathy for her. Mr. Peterson stammered his eyes, flicking nervously toward Tilly, then back to the imposing figure of the sheriff. She was there, Sheriff. I saw her." The words were a choked whisper of betrayal, born of pure terror. Cain clapped him on the shoulder, a predator's pat. "I knew you were an honest man, Albert. See that you stay that way." He strode back to his office without another glance at Tilly, but the damage was done. The whispers of the townsfolk would now turn from pity to condemnation. She wasn't just a girl who'd made a mistake. She was a common thief, a liar. Cain was systematically stripping away her name, her reputation, her very identity. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The injustice was a physical weight crushing her. She felt a slight tug on the chain. She looked up. Cole was watching her, his dark eyes intense. "Do not let his lies become your truth," he said, his voice firm. "He uses the fear of others as his weapon. Look at that man." He gestured with his head toward Mr. Peterson, who was now frantically sweeping his movements, jerky and panicked. "Who is the prisoner? You who is bound by iron, or him who is bound by his own fear?" Tilly stared at the terrified shopkeeper, and then back at the man chained beside her. He was right. Cain's power was an illusion built on the cowardice of others. In that moment, her despair began to curdle into something else, something harder and hotter anger. Later that evening, as Deputy Miller brought them a meager meal of stale bread and jerky, Tilly noticed Cole examining the manacle on his wrist with intense focus. He twisted his arm, studying the lock mechanism, the pins, the way the metal was joined. "The boy Miller," Cole whispered to her after the deputy had gone. "He's not like the sheriff." "No," Tilly agreed. "He's decent, I think." But he's afraid of Cain. Fear can be a door, Cole murmured, more to himself than to her. Sometimes it locks you in. Sometimes, if you find the key, it lets you out. He fell silent again, but Tilly could feel a change in him. The stoic patience had been replaced by a quiet, simmering energy. He was no longer just enduring. He was watching. He was planning. And a tiny, dangerous spark of hope ignited in Tilly's chest. The hope that cages, no matter how strong, were still made to be broken. The following afternoon, Sheriff Cain approached. He moved with a lazy confidence that set every nerve in Tilly's body on edge. He dismissed Deputy Miller with a flick of his wrist and stood before her, blocking the sun. He was holding a clean dress and a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. He placed them on the ground just out of her reach. "This has gone on long enough, Matilda," he said, his voice a low, almost intimate purr. Tilly said nothing, her eyes fixed on his polished boots. "I am a reasonable man," he continued, "and a forgiving one. I spoke with Judge Morrison this morning. He's a good friend of mine. I explained the circumstances. Your mother's health, your feminine hysterics." He smiled, a condescending twist of his lips. "I can make all of this go away." Her head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "The charges are dropped. You'll be released. That parcel there contains the finest laudanum from my personal supply, more than enough for your mother. This dress is for you. There is a room waiting at the hotel. You can have a hot bath, a real meal. You can be clean again." The offer was a cool drink in the desert, a sudden shocking glimpse of freedom. But she knew Cain. There was always a price. "And what is it you want, Sheriff?" His eyes roamed over her, and for the first time she saw the full depth of his possessive hunger. It was cold and absolute. "Your gratitude," he said smoothly, "and your companionship. Redemption. Gulch needs a respectable woman by its sheriff's side. My housekeeper is old and clumsy. I find myself in need of assistance. At my home." The unspoken words hung in the air between them, thick and vile. He wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her a different kind of chain, one made of silk and shame instead of iron. She would be his property, hidden away in his house, a secret to be used and discarded. The anger she'd felt before now blazed into a white-hot fury. "I would rather rot here," she spat, her voice trembling. Cain's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "You mistake your position, girl. You are a thief, a liar. No one in this town will lift a finger for you. Your mother will die gasping for air, and you will listen to her rattle from this very spot. This offer is the only salvation you will get." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I will ask you once more tomorrow. If your answer is the same, I'll have Deputy Miller escort your Comanche friend to the old oak tree for a necktie social. And I'll make you watch." He straightened up, his composure restored. "Think on it, Matilda. Think about what you truly value." He turned and walked away, leaving the dress and the parcel in the dust like an insult. Tilly stared after him, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and revulsion. He would do it. She had no doubt. He would hang Cole just to prove a point, just to break her. That night, the whispers between them were urgent. She told Cole everything, her voice breaking as she recounted Cain's threat. He listened, his jaw tight. When she was finished, he did not offer words of comfort. He offered a plan. "Tonight," he said, his voice low and firm, "there is a storm coming from the west. I have watched the clouds gather for 2 days. The wind will rise. It will cover the sound." "Sound of what?" Tilly breathed. "The weakest link is not the chain," he explained, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. "It is the lock on your manacle. It is old, poorly made, not like mine. He gestured to his own heavy riveted cuff. Mine was made by a soldier, but yours is a town lock. For 2 days he hadn't been idle. Using a small sharp-edged stone he had worked loose from the hard-packed earth, he had been patiently, meticulously scraping at a tiny piece of metal he'd broken from the bottom of the water bucket, a thin, stiff sliver of tin. He had hidden it in a crack in the wooden post. "It is a pick," he said. "The tumblers inside the lock are simple. With the wind and with luck, I can open it." "And what about you?" Tilly asked, her heart racing. "Your cuff is too strong." "You will go," he stated, as if it were the only possible outcome. "You will go to the livery stable at the edge of town, the one owned by a man named Hector. He is a drunkard and a heavy sleeper. You will take 2 horses. Not the best ones, they will be missed too quickly. Take the sturdy mare and the bay gelding. You will ride west toward the breaks of the Palo Duro. There are canyons there, places to hide." "I won't leave you here," she protested, the words escaping in a horrified whisper. "Listen to me," he commanded, his voice sharp, cutting through her panic. "If you are gone, his threat against me is meaningless. He has no more leverage over you. He will be angry. He will come after you. But you will have a head start." "He'll kill you anyway. He wants a trial," Cole countered. "He wants to make a show for the territorial government, to prove he is taming this land. He will not hang me without a spectacle. It will buy me time." "Time for what?" He looked at her, and in the faint moonlight, she saw a flicker of something she had never seen in his eyes before, a raw, fierce vulnerability. "Time to follow you." A roll of thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl that vibrated through the ground. The wind was beginning to pick up, kicking dust into their faces. "He underestimates you," Cole whispered, his fingers working to retrieve the sliver of tin from its hiding place. "He thinks you are a frightened girl. You will show him the strength of a woman who fights for her family. Now turn your wrist toward me. We do not have much time." Tilly's mind was a whirlwind of fear and a wild, terrifying hope. Trusting him was a leap into an abyss, but staying meant a fate worse than death. She took a deep breath, the dust and the coming rain filling her senses, and did as he said. She turned her wrist toward the darkness, toward the man chained beside her, and placed her freedom in his hands. The storm broke with the fury of a vengeful god. A sudden violent gust of wind tore through Redemption Gulch, ripping a shutter from its hinges and sending it clattering down the street. The sky, which had been pricked with stars moments before, was now a bruised, boiling mass of clouds. Rain began to fall, not in drops, but in thick, heavy sheets that turned the dust to mud in seconds. It was the perfect cover. Now, Cole grunted, his body contorted as he reached around the post, his hands finding her manacled wrist in the dark. "Hold still." Tilly could feel the faint, rhythmic scraping of the metal pick inside the lock. It was an impossibly delicate sound against the roaring backdrop of the storm. Every crash of thunder made her jump, certain that Cain or his deputy would appear, their faces illuminated by a sudden flash of lightning. Her muscles were screaming in protest. The angle was awkward, and the cold rain was plastering her thin dress to her skin, chilling her to the core. But she held as still as stone, her entire being focused on the tiny, intricate work happening at her wrist. Cole worked with an intense, unwavering focus. His breathing was low, and even a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of the storm. He was a man accustomed to patience, to waiting for the precise moment. She could feel the warmth of his fingers against her skin, a small point of heat in the cold, wet darkness. It was the first human touch she had felt in days that wasn't violent or coercive, and the sensation was so potent it almost made her weep. "The third tumbler is rusted," he muttered, his voice strained with effort. "It sticks." A brilliant fork of lightning split the sky, illuminating the town square in a ghostly, strobing light. In that brief moment, Tilly saw Cole's face inches from hers. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his lips a thin, determined line. Rainwater streamed down his face, dripping from his hair and chin. In that split second, she didn't see a savage warrior. She saw a man fighting with every ounce of his will, not for himself, but for her. He gave a sharp twist, and she heard a faint click, almost lost in a clap of thunder that shook the very ground. The pressure on her wrist vanished. The manacle sprang open. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She was free. The iron ring fell away, leaving a raw, chafed circle on her skin. "Go!" Cole's voice was a harsh command, pulling her from her stupor. "Do not run. Walk. Head for the alley behind the general store. Stay in the shadows. Go now, Tilly." The use of her name, so raw and urgent, spurred her into action. She scrambled to her feet, her legs unsteady. She looked back at him, a dark, powerful shape, still bound to the post. Leaving him felt like tearing away a part of herself. "Cole," she began. "Go," he repeated, his voice like the crack of a whip. "Do not look back. Ride west. I will find you." She turned and forced herself to move. Keeping her head down against the driving rain, she walked, not ran, across the muddy square. The storm provided the perfect excuse for a hunched figure hurrying through the night. The saloon was still noisy, but the street was deserted. She slipped into the narrow, dark alley between Peterson's store and the assayer's office. The stench of refuse and wet wood filled her nostrils. She moved on pure instinct, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Hector's livery was at the far end of town, a hulking shadow against the stormy sky. As Cole had predicted, the front office was dark. A dim lantern swayed inside the main stable, casting long dancing shadows. The smell of hay and horse was a welcome earthy scent. The main door was barred from the inside, but a side door used for ventilation was secured with only a simple wooden latch. It groaned in protest as she lifted it. She slipped inside her eyes, adjusting to the gloom. The horses shifted in their stalls, their soft snorts and stomps a comforting sound. She found the sturdy roan mare and the bay gelding Cole had described. Her hands, though trembling, moved with purpose. She had grown up around horses. Saddling them in the near darkness was a familiar mechanical process. She worked quickly, her ears straining for any sound of alarm from the town. Every creak of leather, every jingle of a buckle sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence between thunderclaps. She led the horses out the back of the stable into a small corral that opened onto the open prairie. She swung herself into the mare's saddle, her wet dress clinging to her, and took the gelding's reins. For a moment, she paused, looking back at the rain-swept lights of Redemption Gulch. It was the only home she had ever known, and she was leaving it as a fugitive. Her mother was there. Cole was there. But staying meant death for her spirit, if not her body. With a final desperate prayer for the man she was leaving behind, she nudged the mare forward out of the corral and into the vast, stormy darkness of the Texas plains. She rode west, not daring to look back again. The roar of the wind and the pounding of the hooves, a song of desperate, terrifying freedom. Dawn broke grey and grim. The storm had passed, leaving a clean-scrubbed sky and a world dripping with water. The prairie grasses, usually a pale, dusty green, were vibrant and dark. For Tilly there was no beauty in it. There was only the gnawing dread of what the light would bring. She had ridden hard through the night, letting the horses pick their way through the treacherous, rain-slicked terrain. She was exhausted, saddle-sore, and racked with guilt. Every forward step the mare took felt like another step away from Cole, abandoning him to Cain's wrath. "I will find you." His promise was the only thing she clung to. By mid-morning, she knew she was being followed. A faint, dark line on the horizon behind her slowly resolved into a group of riders. A posse. Cain would have discovered her gone at first light, and his fury would be immense. Panic seized her. The land here was open, rolling hills with sparse cover. There was nowhere to hide. She urged the horses on the spare gelding, trotting alongside, but she knew it was a fool's hope. Their horses were fresh. Hers had been running all night. She remembered Cole's words, the breaks of the Palo Duro. Canyons. Looking west, she could see the land changing. The flat prairie began to fracture, falling away into unseen depths. It was her only chance. The chase was a brutal, relentless affair. The posse gained on her steadily. She could hear the faint sound of shouts carried on the wind. They were close enough now that she could make out the lead rider, a tall man on a powerful black horse. Sheriff Cain. Just as despair began to set in the ground before her, simply vanished. She pulled the mare to a skidding halt at the rim of an immense canyon. The Palo Duro. It was a staggering sight, a vast, deep wound in the earth, its walls striped with layers of red and orange rock. A narrow, treacherous-looking trail snaked its way down the canyon wall. There was no choice. Clinging to the saddle horn, she urged the mare onto the path. The descent was terrifying. The trail was slick with mud from the storm, and loose rocks skittered away from the horse's hooves, rattling down into the abyss. But the mare was sure-footed, and the gelding followed without protest. When she risked a glance back, she saw the posse had reached the rim. For a moment, they hesitated. The trail was daunting even for an experienced rider. But Cain's obsession drove him forward. He spurred his horse, leading the charge down into the canyon after her. The canyon was a maze. Side canyons branched off in every direction. The air grew warmer as she descended, the sun reflecting off the red rock walls. The chase became a desperate game of cat and mouse. She would duck into a narrow ravine, holding her breath as the sounds of the posse passed the entrance, only to emerge and find them circling back. Cain knew this land, or at least he was a skilled enough tracker not to be easily fooled. He was pushing her deeper and deeper into the canyon system, cutting off her escape routes. Late in the afternoon, her luck ran out. She rounded a bend and found herself in a box canyon, a dead end with sheer rock walls rising on 3 sides. Trapped. She dismounted, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. She pulled the horses back into the deepest shadows of an overhang, her mind racing. There was nowhere left to run. The sound of approaching horses echoed off the canyon walls. Soon Cain and 3 other men appeared at the canyon's entrance, blocking the only way out. They walked their horses forward, slowly savoring the moment. "It's over, Matilda," Cain called out, his voice smug. He dismounted, looping his reins around a stunted juniper tree. "You led us on a merry chase, I'll give you that. But you were never going to get away." Tilly stood her ground, her hand resting on the mare's neck for support. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her anger was a solid, defiant core inside her. "What now, Sheriff?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "Are you going to chain me to a rock down here?" Cain chuckled. "Oh no. We're going back to Redemption Gulch. We have a hanging to prepare for. Your renegade friend is going to be the main attraction. And you'll have the best seat." He took a step toward her. "But first, I think you need to be taught a lesson about obedience." One of the other men, a brutish-looking fellow with a scarred face, licked his lips and grinned. "Whatever you say, Sheriff." Terror, cold and absolute, washed over Tilly. This was it. There would be no escape, no rescue. Suddenly a sound cut through the air, a high, piercing whistle that seemed to come from the rocks above them. It didn't sound like any bird she knew. Cain and his men froze, looking around in confusion. "What in the hell was that?" one of them muttered. Before anyone could answer, an arrow fletched with hawk feathers slammed into the dirt at Cain's feet. It appeared from nowhere, quivering in the red dust. Everyone looked up. High on the canyon rim, a lone figure stood silhouetted against the bright blue sky. Even from this distance, Tilly recognized the powerful set of his shoulders, the way he held himself with perfect lethal stillness. It was Cole. "Comanche!" the scarred man yelled, fumbling for his pistol. But he was too slow. A second arrow hissed through the air and struck him in the shoulder. He screamed and fell from his horse. Chaos erupted. The other two men drew their weapons and started firing wildly at the figure on the rim, their bullets ricocheting off the rock. Cole melted back from the edge, disappearing from view. "He's up there!" Cain roared, his face a mask of rage. "He's boxing us in!" He was right. They were in the same trap they had set for Tilly. An arrow sprouted from the hindquarters of one of the posse's horses. The animal shrieked and bolted, throwing its rider. Now there were only two of them left, standing Cain and one other man. "He's toying with us!" Cain snarled, his eyes scanning the cliffs. He was a predator who had suddenly found himself the prey, and he didn't like it. Tilly used the confusion to her advantage. While Cain was distracted, she backed her horses deeper into the shadows of the overhang, making herself a smaller target. Then a new sound, the scrape of rock on rock from much closer. Not from above, but from the side. A section of the canyon wall which had looked like a solid cliff face was actually a narrow hidden fissure masked by overgrown brush. And stepping out of it, silent as a ghost, was Cole. He was holding a cavalry pistol, not a bow. He must have descended the canyon at another point and circled around them through its hidden passages. The last posse member saw him first. His eyes went wide with terror. "Cain, look—" He never finished the sentence. Cole fired the pistol. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The man crumpled to the ground. Now it was just Cain. The sheriff spun around, his own gun finally in his hand. He and Cole faced each other across the 20 yards of dusty ground. The hunter and the hunted, their roles reversed. "I should have known you'd be too stubborn to die in a cage." Cain spat his gun leveled at Cole's chest. "You should have known you cannot cage what you do not understand," Cole replied, his voice calm, his pistol steady. For a long, tense moment, neither man moved. It was a standoff, a battle of wills played out under the hot Texas sun. And standing in the shadows, her heart seeming to stop, Tilly watched, knowing that her life and the life of the man who had come back for her would be decided in the next second. The standoff shattered in a blur of motion. Cain, ever arrogant, believed his speed would win the day. He fired first the gunshot, echoing like a thunderclap against the stone walls. But Cole didn't stand still. He moved the instant Cain's muscles tensed, diving to the side, landing in a low crouch behind a rocky outcrop. Cain's bullet splintered the rock where Cole's head had been a second before. Before Cain could fire again, Cole returned the shot. His aim wasn't to kill. The bullet from the cavalry pistol tore through the fleshy part of Cain's thigh. The sheriff roared in pain and fury, staggering back. His leg buckled, and he fell to one knee, his own pistol dropping into the dust. Cole was on him in an instant, moving with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and deadly. He kicked the gun away and pressed the warm barrel of his pistol against Cain's temple. The raw-boned posse man with the arrow in his shoulder was groaning, trying to rise. The one whose horse had bolted was tangled in a mesquite bush, dazed. The other two were still. The fight was over. "Cole, don't," Tilly said, her voice soft but clear as she stepped out from the overhang. Cole's eyes, burning with a cold fire she'd never seen before, flickered to her. He saw her face, the plea in her eyes, and some of the tension eased from his shoulders. He was not a murderer. He pressed the gun harder against Cain's head. "This is not your land to rule," he said, his voice a low growl. "These are not your people to break." He then pistol-whipped Cain across the side of the head. The sheriff slumped to the ground, unconscious. Cole turned to the conscious posse member. "Take your sheriff and go. Tell the people of Redemption Gulch that the canyon has claimed its due. If any of you follow us again, you will not be shown this mercy." The man, wide-eyed with terror, nodded frantically. He and his dazed companion worked together, hauling the unconscious sheriff onto his horse. Within minutes they were gone, leaving their dead behind their retreat, a panicked scramble out of the box canyon. Silence descended, heavy and profound. Tilly and Cole stood alone amidst the quiet aftermath, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. He turned to her, his face a mask of grim exhaustion. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. She crossed the space between them, and without thinking threw her arms around his neck. He was stiff for a moment, surprised by the contact. Then his arms came around her, holding her tightly. She buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of dust leather. And him. It was the scent of safety, the scent of a promise kept. "How did you get free?" she finally whispered into his chest. He pulled back slightly, his hands resting on her arms. "Deputy Miller," he said. "After Cain left with the posse, the boy came. He had a key. He said what Cain was doing was not the law. It was a sickness. He told me which way they rode." The knowledge that the young deputy had found his courage gave Tilly a sliver of hope for the town she had fled. Cole led her deeper into the hidden fissure from which she had emerged. It opened into a small, secluded grotto, where a tiny spring trickled from the rock, pooling in a clear basin before disappearing into the sand. It was a hidden oasis. As Tilly drank the cool, clean water, Cole tended to his own wounds. He had a long, shallow gash along his ribs where a bullet had grazed him. She tore a strip from the hem of her now ruined dress and helped him clean and bind the wound. Their hands touched their movements, slow and gentle, a stark contrast to the violence that had just passed. They stayed in the grotto as the sun set, painting the canyon walls in hues of fire and gold. In the safety of their hidden sanctuary, the stories they had held back finally spilled out. He told her his real name was not Komatse. That was what the white men called his people. His name was Nokoni, meaning wanderer. He was not a warrior by choice, but a hunter. The skirmish that led to his capture wasn't a raid. It was an ambush. "Cain's men," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "They came to our winter camp 5 years ago. They were not soldiers. They were prospectors led by him. They said there was gold on our land. Our chief told them it was sacred ground. Cain. He did not listen." He paused, his eyes fixed on the memory. "They came at dawn. They burned our lodges. My wife. My son." He did not need to finish the sentence. The pain in his eyes was a story in itself. "I was away hunting. I came back to smoke and silence. Cain was the man who led them. I saw his face. I have never forgotten it. When his posse captured me last week, I recognized him. And he recognized me. His capture wasn't random. Cain knew exactly who he was. Chaining him in the square wasn't just punishment for a renegade. It was a personal trophy, a display of dominance over the man whose life he had destroyed." Tilly listened, her heart aching for him. Her own troubles seemed so small in comparison. She finally understood the depth of his stillness, the ancient grief that lay beneath his stoic exterior. He was not just an outcast. He was a survivor, the last remnant of a life that had been stolen from him. "He took everything from you," she whispered, her hand finding his. His fingers closed around hers, his grip strong and warm. "He took the past," Cole corrected her, his gaze turning from the fire to her face. "He will not take the future." In that moment, under a blanket of stars that looked close enough to touch, something shifted between them. It was more than gratitude, more than partnership. It was a profound recognition of two souls who had been broken by the world in different ways, but had found a way to be whole in each other's presence. He leaned in, his movement slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. He kissed her not with passion or hunger, but with a tenderness that spoke of shared pain and the hope of healing. It was a promise of a new beginning sealed in the heart of the canyon that had almost been their tomb. They were no longer just two fugitives running from the law. They were two survivors building a future one breath at a time. They spent 2 days in the hidden grotto healing and planning. Cole, who now insisted she call him Nokone, knew they could not run forever. Cain was a man driven by a venomous pride. He would not let their escape stand. He would send for territorial rangers, paint Nokone as a murderous savage who had abducted a white woman, and he would not stop until they were hunted down. "We cannot run from his lies," Nokone said, as they sat by their small, smokeless fire. "We must return and burn them down with the truth." The idea terrified Tilly. "Go back to Redemption Gulch. They'll hang us both. Cain's power comes from the town's fear." Nokone reasoned, his logic as sharp and clear as the canyon air. "But we have an ally now, the boy, Deputy Miller. If his conscience was strong enough to free me, it may be strong enough to stand for the truth. And you have Mr. Peterson. He lied because he was afraid. We must give him a reason to be brave." The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal, but Tilly saw the wisdom in it. To spend their lives looking over their shoulders was not freedom. Freedom was facing your demons and casting them out into the light. They rode back under the cover of darkness, not on the main trail, but through the rough country Nokone knew so well. They left their horses tied in a thicket of mesquite a mile from town, and crept in on foot shadows in the night. The town was quiet, but it was a tense, watchful quiet. They slipped through the back alleys to the small clapboard house where Deputy Miller lived alone. Nokone tossed a pebble at the window. A light appeared, and a few moments later, a nervous Miller opened the back door, his pistol trembling in his hand. When he saw them, his face went white with shock. You're alive. Thanks to you," Tilly said softly. "We need your help, Matthew. We need you to choose a side, Cain's or the law's." They spent an hour in Miller's small kitchen, laying out the truth. Nokone told him of the massacre 5 years prior, of Cain's greed for gold. Tilly told him of Cain's proposition, the threat against her, the way he had coerced Mr. Peterson into lying. By the time they were done, Matthew Miller's fear had been replaced by a quiet, determined anger. The law he had sworn to uphold had been perverted into one man's personal weapon. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. The next morning, the town of Redemption Gulch awoke to a strange sight. Matilda Foster, the fugitive, stood on the porch of the sheriff's office. She was not in chains. Beside her stood Deputy Miller, his shotgun held loosely in his hands, his face set and resolute. Townsfolk gathered, drawn by the spectacle. They murmured and pointed. Then Sheriff Cain stormed out of his office. His leg bandaged his face, a thunderous mask of fury. Miller. "What is the meaning of this arrest, this woman?" he bellowed. "I don't take orders from you anymore, Bartholomew." Miller said, his voice ringing out with newfound authority. "You're not a lawman. You're a tyrant and a murderer." Cain laughed a harsh, ugly sound. "You're a fool, boy. And you," he sneered at Tilly, "have signed your own death warrant." "The only liar here is you," Tilly said, her voice clear and strong. She turned to the crowd. "Sheriff Cain told you I stole from Mr. Peterson. Is that right, Albert?" All eyes turned to the shopkeeper who stood near the front of the crowd, wringing his hands. "Tell them the truth," Tilly urged, her voice softening. "Tell them what really happened." Mr. Peterson looked at Cain's murderous face, then at Tilly's pleading one, and finally at the steady resolve of Deputy Miller. He took a deep breath. She stole nothing from me." He said the words tumbling out in a rush. "Cain made me say it. He threatened my business, my family." A shocked murmur went through the crowd. The first crack had appeared in Cain's facade of authority. "He's lying," Cain roared. "The woman has bewitched him." "Did she also bewitch the men you led to the Comanche camp at Willow Creek 5 years ago?" Miller challenged. "The ones you paid to murder women and children so you could search for gold on their land." This was the final blow. Several older men in the crowd, ranchers and prospectors, who had been in the territory for years, exchanged knowing, uncomfortable glances. The story of the Willow Creek raid had been whispered about, an ugly rumor most had chosen to ignore. "These are the ravings of a madman and a savage," Cain yelled, reaching for his pistol, but he never cleared the holster. From the roof of the general store opposite the office, an arrow whistled down and pinned his gun hand to the thick leather of his belt. It was a perfect disabling shot. Cain screamed in pain and shock. Noconi stood up, a bow in his hand, a figure of righteous judgment watching over the scene. The spell was broken. Cain was no longer the untouchable titan of Redemption Gulch. He was just a man, bleeding and exposed. The crowd, sensing the shift in power, surged forward, their fear finally turning to rage. They surrounded Cain, their voices rising in a cacophony of accusation. Tilly watched not with triumph, but with a somber sense of justice. She had not come back for revenge, but for truth. She and Noconi did not stay. Their justice had been served. They slipped away in the ensuing chaos, collected their horses, and rode away from Redemption Gulch, not as fugitives, but as free people. They headed west towards the vast open lands of New Mexico, where the canyons were deep, and a man and a woman could build a new life far from the ghosts of the past. They didn't know what the future held, only that they would face it together, their bond forged not in iron and dust, but in courage and an unbreakable love. The story of Matilda and Noconi isn't just a tale of the Old West. It's a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be caged. They began as prisoners chained by a corrupt man's law, but discovered a deeper freedom by trusting one another. Their journey through the dust and danger of the frontier teaches us that true strength isn't about the gun you carry, but the truth you're willing to fight for. It reminds us that even in the most brutal of worlds, courage can rewrite any story. What did you think of Noconi's brand of justice? What would you have done in Tilly's place? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If their story of defiance and unlikely love moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with a friend who loves epic tales, and subscribing for more stories from the heart of the Wild West. Thank you for listening.